You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
One of my favorite things about creating this podcast is it helps me expand my horizons. Creating a podcast is not about building an audience. It's about building a community. During my Arts Madness tournament this year, I shared some of the things students around the U.S. have been saying about their chosen artists and artworks. Today's guest wrote me a kind email after I gave a shout out to one of her students, and it made my day. I decided to invite her to be my guest, and I am so glad I did, because she suggested an artist I had not yet learned much about. While I was disappointed with the mic issues I had in the recording with this episode, I still had a great time because I got to meet a new person from thousands of miles away who helped me to learn about the amazing and inspiring Alma Thomas.
I feel like who art ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art ed? Mr. Wood art ed me.
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, where we explore visual arts in an audio medium. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and joining me today, I have the art teacher from Coachella Valley High School out in California, Bridget McCarthy. Thank you for taking the time. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I am excited too. One of my favorite things is getting to meet and talk to people from all different parts of the country and sometimes even from other countries. It's kind of the cool, joyful thing of this podcast, getting to meet new people and learn from new people. And you brought this one to me today. You said one of your favorite artists, because I always ask, like, who do you like to talk about? We've got Alma Thomas. So Thomas was born September 22nd, 1891 in Columbus, Georgia. And I guess her father worked in a church. Her mother was a homemaker and a seamstress. Alma was the oldest child with three younger sisters. And I thought it was kind of interesting. Her mother was a seamstress. I guess when she was first going to college, initially she was thinking about going into costume design. I always like to see when those little threads come together, if I can belabor that analogy.
Right. And threads, in her art too. Yes.
Yeah. And so her family was well respected within their Georgia community. She grew up in like a nice Victorian home on a hill overlooking a town. I mean, it all just sounds like a wonderful environment growing up. And she was taking in just the natural beauty of the surroundings. I guess she really liked nature as a child. But then when she was around 15 years old, her family moved to Washington, D.C.
You know, the reason they moved to D.C. was she had just graduated from ninth grade, I guess, and she wouldn't be allowed to go to high school in Georgia. And so her family, the opportunities were in D.C., from what I understand.
Wait, she couldn't go to high school? Was that?
It was segregated, and I'm not clear on what the pathways were at that time. And so her parents wanted her to have more opportunities, and they moved to DC.
Okay, because I had read about it as she had faced discrimination, and I wasn't sure if it was racial or gender discrimination, because we're talking about like early 20th century. It could have been either one. Right. But yeah, so they moved in order to get her more educational opportunities, which makes perfect sense. I would move to get my kids better educational opportunities too.
Right, absolutely.
She went on to attend Howard University. In 1924, she was the first to graduate from their new art department. And I always read that, and I don't know about you, but I wonder, like, so did they have a graduation ceremony with like one person?
Right. I don't know. And she didn't, I love that she didn't start with that. She started with something else, and I'm blanking on what she had started out studying. It was mathematics or architecture, possibly.
I've read costume design, and then I've also read stuff about like economics, maybe.
Right. I
if
know
I'm
she was
recalling correctly.
doing mechanical drawing at one point, but somebody got her in and geared her toward art. I love, how people make impacts in our life, and then she became the only person to graduate that year, or the first.
Yeah, it's funny. She was kind of steered into that art department. I wonder if they were just like, we don't have anybody to graduate from this art department. We need you to do this.
Right.
But she was a woman of many firsts, because she was not only the first to graduate with a BFA from Howard University. When she was 80 years old, 1972, she was the first African-American woman to have a solo show at the Whitney Museum of American Art. So like, she was just a trailblazer throughout her entire life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very inspiring figure. And so then after she graduated from Howard, I think she went to Pennsylvania for like a teacher's educational program to round out her education, to prepare her to be a teacher, because she worked for 35 years teaching art to junior high students, no less. I mean, that, as art teaching gigs go, like, that's what I would always consider to be the hardest.
Right. Did you hear anything? Did she teach math initially and then teach art? I feel like in my early research, I read somewhere, and I can't find it again, that she had taught math. And I keep going back to the math.
I've read different things about what she was doing in her teaching career. Primarily, she was, I believe, teaching junior high. I have read early on in her 20s, she was teaching kindergarten for some period.
Right.
And I have seen something about math, but I don't have a source on that I don't feel confident in my assertions about that.
Right.
Like, it would not at all surprise me, because this is ringing a bell, but I don't have like multiple reliable sources that I can cite on that.
I know she was in the same classroom for 35 years is one quote that she talked about. As an art teacher, that would be a great thing, to not have to move all of your stuff, like many art teachers now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The pictures are amazing with what she did. And I think she started teaching sculpture with her students, it sounds like.
Yes, she was getting into some of the ceramic sculptures and all of that.
Right. Would have loved to meet her.
Oh, I know. And I love the way that she talks about her career and her art and her inspiration. A lot of artists, I don't know what it is, they just seem to have this beautiful way of talking about their work. One of the greatest quotes I've seen from a 1970 interview, she said, "Creative art is for all time and is therefore independent of time. It is of all ages, of every land." And I just think like that is such a beautiful guiding principle. And that gives me such insight into why she was making work the way that she was. At first glance, her work that she's best known for, it's almost like a mosaic of colorful splashes, somewhat impressionistic, except it becomes much more abstracted than like what Monet and everyone else from that movement was doing.
Right.
And I think it's because she's simplifying things to a way that it does become timeless. It does become universal. And I think that's just such a nice way of talking about and thinking about and conceiving of your art.
Absolutely. There is some quote when she discovered the art room. She said something like she entered the classroom and felt like she was in heaven. And that carried through in all of her, her understanding of wanting to make something beautiful and timeless and for people to look at. She had a wonderful spirit, it seems like.
Yeah. And as we were talking about, like, in her art room, we've already mentioned the fact that she spent 35 years teaching art. And what the accounts I've read indicate that she was kind of using that teaching career to support herself so that she could be making the art that she wanted to make on her own. She was a working teaching artist. She was still continuing to pursue the arts throughout her educational career, and she was educating herself as well. I think she went on to get a master's from Columbia University, and she continued studying and exhibiting throughout that career. Early on, I believe her work was a little bit more sort of naturalistic, a little bit more representational. And it was, from what I understand, one of the big turning points was 1966, Howard University offered to put on a retrospective show of her work. She had actually been considering giving up painting because of the arthritis pain. I mean, she was born in 1891, so she's like in her 70s at this point. And it was just too good of an opportunity to pass up. I mean, a solo show, that's what every artist dreams of.
Right.
And especially like at your alma mater, like how validating would that be?
Right. Right. Yeah.
So she looks out her window and she's struck by the color, and she watches the sunlight shifting the colors on the trees and the flowers in her garden. And that's where she starts to become much more expressionistic and a little bit more abstract in her style. And this later period of her life is where we see her develop that style that she is really known for today, that has resonated with so many people.
That was an interesting thing for me, that the arthritis, she could no longer do some of the stuff that she had been doing. And so this was a way for her to, she found ways to express, and it's the arthritis kind of created like an obstacle that then from that, it reminds me that embrace the shake thing, find out what does work. And, and she was doing that long before,
I love that. I love that name dropping the Embrace the Shake from Phil Hansen, the artist who had a disability, a tremor that he had developed while he was doing pointillist style work. And he just leaned into that and developed a whole new style, embracing that. And she, is another one of those examples of the paradox of how limitations can be some ways freeing. And I also love the idea that she just kept going, the persistence. Like I am not in my 70s. I get home from a day in a, by teaching standards, very cushy gig.
right.
And I'm exhausted. And I don't know how she basically built a prominent career when everyone else is done, when everyone else is retiring.
Right.
She just kept going just for the sake of doing it, because, at a certain point, she didn't need the money anymore. She had the stature, and she was still giving back to others. She was still helping to contribute to the art scene and the art education scene, even after she was retired from her position as a teacher. And I just find that so beautiful and so inspiring. And so I guess with that idea of her having a professional second act, if you will, I think it seems like a good natural transition. We'll start talking about Resurrection. This is an acrylic on canvas painting from 1966. I always want to give the guest a chance. What are you seeing here? What's jumping out at you?
The first time I ever saw this, I thought it was, I saw a well. With the blue at the bottom, I always thought it was water at the bottom. And the more I've learned about her, I see a lot of threads and fabric. I know mosaic is talked a lot about it, but I picture a close-up of fabric, and those white parts are the weaving part. So I've started to see that, but there's so much burst happening with those concentric circles. So it's just happy. But the well, I still see the well because that's the first thing I ever saw. And the title Resurrection, I couldn't find a ton about it, but I mean, like, or, that she had written about why she named it Resurrection. I don't know, but just talking about seeing, I still see a well. That's my initial, and then the threads. So,
and that's interesting because I never saw it that way, but it makes perfect sense for the blues to be receding and the concentric circles to seem like they're going further into space. I always saw this with the light burst sort of thing. And even though it's like blue rings in the middle and everything like that, I always saw this almost like a sun or something like that, like the eye in the sky, like it's just bright, radiant force.
right.
And it seems happy to me. And I think partially that might be because I guess I should get into just the bare bones, like description of literally
Right.
what are we seeing here. The composition is concentric circles made out of different bands of colors. We see yellow on the outside, then it goes into orange and then red and then sort of magenta into the blues and green and then yellow again in the center. And it is a square composition and the circles are centered in that composition. And it's all made of these individual brush strokes that make almost like a mosaic type of pattern. Although, as you say, the threads connection, I can completely see and understand that. I also was not able to find her talking about why she named it Resurrection. For me, it seemed like, and again, maybe this is just my drawing conclusions based on inferences from what I've seen and just culture. I think of, when I hear resurrection, having grown up in Catholic schools, my first thought is of, the religious significance of Jesus resurrected and knowing that she was raised in a family where her father worked in the church. And this was at a time when she was kind of thinking of getting out of painting. And then she's offered this solo show and she's refocusing on nature and developing a new style. To me, resurrection just seems like it's this rebirth and reinvigorated in her career and in her painting and her outlook. But maybe that's just because I like to find the happy connection.
Right. Yeah, that's not. I'd love to see that more throughout, in any research, the explanation of it to make sure that that's what it was. But it seems like that does make sense, like that it's not an end. I love that what you talked about with she's starting basically a new chapter and she sees it as a new life. It makes sense. That definitely makes sense.
Yeah, I have absolutely nothing to back it up. I just always feel free to wildly speculate because she's not here to correct me.
Right.
So come at me on Twitter or whatever.
Right. And it's when somebody comes out with the biography, then we can find out for sure. I'm sure somebody knows. But it does seem, it makes sense that burst, a new burst. And she kept saying there was something about, she kept saying like, absolutely, this needs to get done or something. Like there was something she would repeat. Absolutely. Like I need to do this. I need to complete when she was asked to do the retrospective.
Yeah.
That was her like trying to fill in a blank. And so this seems, do you know if this was like toward the beginning of her starting to do this style or did she start more with the vertical lines?
This was, I believe, around the time of the shift in her style. And I picked this one because she was offered that Howard University retrospective in 1966, the same year that this piece was painted.
Oh, okay. So toward the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also, point of personal privilege. I picked it just because I like it, just because I look at this and the colors are so saturated. I mean, these are like pure hues. It's not muted at all by like mixing in other colors. Like it is just like a pure yellow and orange and red. Like it feels like cadmium colors ready to like just burst off of there. And it just it feels warm and happy.
Yes.
And I feel like, that it's the kind of thing that just makes me smile when I look at it. So that was also part of why I picked it.
Absolutely. I love that it hung in the White House. They said that that's, one of the things that they put in the dining room to add to the White House collection. And it just seems like it would be a great piece to see every day, to bring light and burst. The color is very, very amazing. And having taught elementary school, when I first saw this to me, I understand how something can look simple, but when you do it, you find out that it's not.
Yeah.
This, like you can assume something until you actually try it. And this to me at first looked very simple, but there is a calculation in it. And, she was careful in the distance and that small white line in between each, the outline without having outlined it. I'd love to see it from really far away to see if it does like the pointillism effect.
Mm-hmm. I think you make a really good point about how it's deceptively simple, because especially a simple design needs to be flawlessly executed.
Yes.
For it to actually work, for it to actually come together. And her balance of the colors in not just the color that she's painting, but the color she's allowing to show through on the canvas. It's the positive and the negative space, that interplay of colors. That's crucial. And I think we talked about that, the fact that it seems to have this radiating effect. Like when I squint or from a distance, the little white spaces, especially around that exterior yellow,
yes,
that really does something for my eye, because it's so sort of low contrast. My eye it's almost like an op art shimmery type of effect. And normally when I'm talking about op art, I would be talking about like complementary colors juxtaposed or put together. But you can also have some interesting things happening as your eye is trying to differentiate these lower contrast things happening, where it's that white and yellow kind of coming together. It almost creates that sort of like corona effect.
Right. And I'm just noticing that those the two more orange, are those two different? Is it, the more I look at it,
it just looks, and that's one of those things that, you would almost have to digitally sample to determine with certainty. But it looks to me like each of those bands starting in the orange is a slightly different shade. And it could be the effect of the way that our eye perceives color in relation to its surroundings, where that outer orange band has yellow and then a different orange next to it. But if you look very carefully, it looks like two red bands there, and those look slightly different to me as well.
right.
And the blues look slightly different. I think it's actually just slight differences. And that subtle shift, I think, is, like I said, the simple design needs to be flawlessly executed for it to work.
Yes.
And the more you look at these things, the more of those aspects you start to notice and appreciate. Just like I look at it and I think like it's actually, as much as we think like circles upon circles seems so simple,
right.
It's a very sophisticated way of looking at work when we start to talk about I'm a big fan of semiotics. I'm a huge fan of Keith Haring, and I love simplicity in a design because to me, stripping away detail makes it more open-ended for everybody to connect to. And as I said, there was that beautiful quote. She talked about how art is for all people of all lands, and to put her words into here, because I cannot speak about this better than she can.
Right.
The quote that resonated with me was she talked about the use of color in my paintings is of paramount importance to me. Through color, I have sought to concentrate on beauty and happiness rather than on man's inhumanity to man. And like this piece to me, it just radiates beauty and happiness. And I like that it has that ripple effect of like, the way a stone dropped in the water ripples out. And I feel like it's that warmth radiating out.
Right.
Or the well analogy now it's given me that tunnel look.
Right.
Now, as I'm looking at it,
I just want to dive into it right now. Look really closely.
And again, that's that kind of thing that you get because it's a close cropped image that creates this figure ground ambiguity. In some ways, it's almost like there is no positive and negative space. It's all these bands of roughly equal weight here.
Right.
And all the same sort of contrast.
Yeah. I just keep seeing more. I had never thought. I've always seen just two orange, two red. And then now I am definitely seeing her color theory was pretty amazing. She was part of the color field group, or was she inspired by them? I wasn't clear.
She was definitely contemporary with them and learning from them, learning alongside of them. And I think to some extent inspired by that work, but I don't think she was strictly, although I don't know. I don't know who was hanging out with whom. Right. And I don't think anybody was like a card carrying member of an artist group. Like I feel like that's just something that for the most part, like people look back and create these associations of movements just to organize and categorize things for convenience of talking about it. But I always feel like it's always a lot muddier than that.
Right.
But her colors were not muddy. Her colors were
no. I mean, yeah, that and her use of color definitely didn't make sense. Now that I'm looking closer, I'm kind of stunned right now.
Yeah, her color makes sense, and then at the same time, there's this little bit of like this push pull. Like I think of like Hans Hofmann type of thing, where like, some of the blue feels like it's coming out, but it should be receding. And, I can look at it in different ways. Like I said, there's this little bit of tension, almost figure ground play that I see in her work that I find really interesting.
Oh, yeah. I agree. I think I'm going to have to introduce a lesson.
Yeah.
Inspired by Alma Thomas.
Color theory, expressive qualities. There's a lot you can tap into there.
I love that she loved beauty and shared it with the world.
And I think we could all use more of that. I think that's why it seems so appropriate that it hung in the White House for a while,
Yes.
We need beauty in those ugly places.
Yes. That is so true. Is somebody, can I make a side note? I'm so sorry. Somebody was saying that the White House bought it for $300,000, but they think today it would be worth $2 million. And that was only like 7 years ago or something like that. Like the value
that sounds
just since,
That sounds totally plausible to me. I don't know those numbers.
Right.
But that scale of appreciation seems about right, just because of the way the art market is,
Right. Yeah.
I'm wrapping it up. I want just a 3-point rating scale. And where should this hang? The Louvre? Is this something to look at? the lab? Is this something to learn from? Or the loo? British for the bathroom.
Yeah, there's a
the
poop
loo.
joke in there somewhere.
Oh, that's terrible.
In honor of her, I would say to look at. So that would be the Louvre, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think she, she said, I wanted something beautiful that you could sit and look at. And I kind of feel like that's what she was going for. Although the lab, like we just, we're breaking it down. So learning from it, I don't know. Do we honor her or do we put it in the lab and break it down?
I think we could do a little bit of both. We don't have to be strict on this.
Right. Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out where we sit with the piece. And I think you're right. I think a strong argument could be made for both, because this does feel in some ways like a color study, almost like taking Seurat's ideas about divisionism to like the logical conclusion. But I think for me, I like you end up putting this in the museum just because this feels like something to look at and to appreciate, and it can be appreciated on several different levels. The formalist in me is looking at the compositional elements and the structure to it and the way that she's mixing the cup or not mixing the colors. She's juxtaposing the colors, putting them side by side, and the effects of that. But I also just think it taps into something and resonates just on an unconscious level. And it gets you to feel something for a moment before you've even really processed it mentally. And I think that's beautiful. And I think we need more of that.
Yes, more of that. More of that. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much for giving up more of your time to
Thank
come
you.
and sit with me. I really appreciate it. And
I appreciate everything you do for the art world right now, sharing art history and a love of art history and making it accessible for our students. And, I'm very grateful. So thank you.
Well, I am grateful for you taking the time to use my podcast in your classroom. That was awesome. Yes. And very surreal to actually make a connection and hear that someone else was listening to the stuff we've done. And then also taking the time to join me on the podcast and bring all that together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Gotta love art teachers.
Gotta love art teachers. Always willing to help out with whatever is needed.
Yes. Thank you.